I'm Stephen Dantu. I actually go by my last name, which is Dantu. And I head up Marsh's big data capabilities. Now, as Anand mentioned, Marsh is a 113-year-old company, primarily in the insurance brokerage space. Right? We're a wholly owned subsidiary of Marsh & McLennan. Right? Marsh & McLennan overall is about $14 billion in revenue. We have over 60,000 colleagues worldwide. Right? And Marsh, in all its years of existence, has truly been that risk broker. And we go in between our clients and the insurance carriers. So we don't underwrite our own policies. We actually service our clients using insurance as one way to mitigate risk. And our traditional sweet spot has been large businesses, buildings, fleet owners, stadium owners, roadways, where we work with the clients on a one-on-one basis, talk to them about their risk mitigation needs, whether it's property and casualty, whether it's general liability, whether it's auto insurance, whether it is officers and directors, whether it's kidnap and ransom at times, or marine insurance and so on. And really, on a one-on-one basis, work with them to ensure their risk mitigation is actually achieved. And a big component of that is insurance and policies. And we work with our clients to line up almost an ensemble of insurance carriers that can meet some of these demands. Sometimes not one carrier is able to meet all of their risk mitigation needs. All right, that's been our traditional space. Now, as we look into the future, what we are seeing is that the demand side of the house and the supply side of the house are dramatically changing. Now, our existing business is pretty solid, right? The large business, high touch, broker interactions, multiple back and forths. That's very profitable for us. And we've actually made a very decent living off of mitigating risk, right? And we want to grow that business further, and we'll continue to grow that business further. But what we're also seeing is this newer opportunities. The newer opportunities with what we call the gig or the sharing economies. Examples are Uber and Lyft. Examples are your self-driving cars. It poses a whole level of risks into the ecosystem. Right? With Uber and Lyft, you instantly go from driving your own car, right, for yourself, to being almost like a small business owner. You have a different liability insurance that you need. You have a different kind of property and casualty that you need, right? And we want to position Marsh as a company, as a broker, that can actually play in this new space as well, right? We're also seeing businesses and consumers being a lot more digital savvy. I mean, it's an on-demand mindset. I'm sure it's the same with all of you as well. You want to watch your shows when you want it, at the time you want to watch it. And you probably binge watch all the time as well, right? But that's up to you. And that's what we want to provide from an insurance perspective as well, right? And if you look at the supply side of the house, it's not just the insurance companies, right? You have insurtech coming into the world, right? You have so much disruption with the insurtechs that actually it's a fantastic time to be in the insurance industry, right? We saw how the big techs have disrupted the industry with Amazons of the world, the Googles of the world, Airbnbs of the world. We've seen how the fintechs got disrupted as well with PayPals and Squares. And now we're seeing a similar phenomenon in the insurance industry as well with the insurtechs. And we want to position ourselves, even though we're a 113-year-old company, we want to position ourselves to bang on that opportunity, right? This is a huge opportunity and is the fastest growing segment from our perspective, right? At the same time, you're also seeing growth in alternative capital. It's not just the insurance companies anymore. It is reinsurance. It is captives. It is people that are saying, hey, listen, I can take my own risk to a certain level, and you provide the alternate capital for anything beyond that. And most importantly, from our perspective, it's really the big tech companies now playing in the insurance space as well, with Amazon going after your prescription business and so on. Right, so all of this is really having us to rethink how we deliver insurance in the digital age. And truly what we want to create is a digital broker, right? Something that's seamless, that's smart, and it's scalable. And that's our Bluestream platform, right? It's a cloud-native platform that's built with exactly these kind of constraints in mind. It's got to be scalable. It's got to have a seamless UI UX experience, very similar to the experience that all of you have when you use your Amazons or Ubers and Lyfts when you ride share. Right? It's got to be seamless. It's got to be available anytime you are, and it's got to be easy to use. All right, so what is Bluestream? It really is a digital broker, right? You're replacing your high touch with high tech, right? You're going from one-on-one interactions to really scaling using technology. And we truly are that middle player that's connecting our distributions, our various distribution channels, with the supply, which is the products and the capital. And our focus has really been on small commercial as well as consumer. Right? If you think of it, your Uber experience, right? When you sign up to be a driver, we want to tie up with Uber such that we're able to offer insurance right in that same flow. Right? You sign up to be a driver, the very next screen with the exact same UI is sent actually to our page, let's say, and you're able to purchase insurance, all in that flow. Right? That's the kind of seamless UI, UX experience that we want to deliver using our Bluestream platform. And quite honestly, it's a monumental shift for us, right? It's really going from an industry that was very relationship-based, very client-focused, very wine and dine heavy, to an industry that's very high-tech. And granted, the business models are completely different, right? We will still continue to grow our large business, but this gives us an opportunity to play in the small consumer, in the small commercial rather, and the consumer segment in a B2B2C type of. All right. So really, from our perspective, our whole cloud journey, our whole cloud strategy is hinged on having a product that is truly cloud native, that is seamless, gives access to multiple choices for consumers, is able to have on-demand analytics, and is continually evolving and incorporates all of the emerging techs as well. All right, let's talk a little about our cloud journey. That was really the business impetus for us to drive and push us towards clouds. Let's talk a little about our cloud journey and the new frontier, as we call it at Marsh. Just from a cloud adoption perspective, and maybe I'll just do a quick audience poll. How many of you are already in the cloud or are actively migrating your data in the cloud? Okay. Of 10, that's about 20-odd%. I was hoping it would be a little more, given that it's a Strata data conference and so on, but our survey says it's about 56%, right, are either already in the cloud or are actively migrating. All right, so again, maybe one of you can give me the answer for this. What do you think one of the top compelling reasons to go to the cloud is based on a survey? Anybody? Scalability, perfect. All right, it's speed and agility, right? Scale is, I think, was number 2. But this is really saying, hey, I want to be able to do things at a faster pace with much faster agility than I've ever been able to do before. And I guess for the folks that are not in cloud, what is the biggest concern right now of not going to cloud? Anybody? Perfect, security. All right, survey says security, 62%. So 62% are really saying that, hey, you know what? Security and compliance are the reasons why I just don't want to be in the cloud. And that's fair, because the risks are real. When you talk about public cloud, the risks are real, right? You could get hacked, there could be all kinds of bad things, and you could be showcased in a Wall Street Journal front page, right? Nobody wants that. All right, so let me talk to you about our journey to the cloud, knowing that the risks are real, and knowing very well that Marsh, as a company, has built a living, very nice living, by the way, has made a very nice living by being risk averse, right? Then why on hell are we taking that journey, and how are we actually making that journey to the cloud? All right, so it all starts with a clear articulation of your business strategy. In our case, it was clear. It was Bluestream. It was our digital broker. It had to be in the cloud because of scale. It had to be in the cloud because of speed. It had to be in the cloud because we wanted that agility, that speed to market. Because if you're playing in the small commercial and small commercial B2B2C space, you've got to be nimble. You can't be this old legacy insurance company that just takes too much time to move. All right? Our goal was also to be API driven. We don't want the back and forths anymore. We just want a standard set of APIs that can then be called from any client, whether it is, let's say, Uber or Lyft or Airbnb. They call our APIs. We're able to then use APIs to call our carriers, and we're able to provide that code in real time, right? The articulation, in my mind, needs to also include the risks of not using cloud. Right? What are you getting by not going to the cloud? And that's the question we get asked a lot of times, especially with our larger IT organization, which is, why can't you just do it on-prem? Why can't we just buy servers and have it ready for you guys, and then you can scale? And really, that isn't a way to scale, right? It's a good way to scale if you're expecting 10 clients. It's a decent way to scale if you're expecting 20 clients. But all of a sudden, if you're going after small commercial and B2B2C, you have thousands of clients. You can't scale by buying servers and racking and stacking them, right? And lastly, it's your cloud migration strategy, or your cloud risk mitigation strategy, because the concerns are real. How do you articulate a clearly defined risk mitigation strategy before you actually take your data to the cloud? All right, and I'll talk about some of those risk mitigation aspects as well. From our perspective, it was clear. We said, you know what? Anytime we're building something new, especially around our digital broker, or very directly on our digital broker, it's going to be on the cloud. It's going to be cloud native. It's going to be cloud first. We're going to put all of that into the cloud. Second step is really optimize what we have. More often than not, we see companies that launch into cloud, and then all of a sudden start migrating everything into the cloud. That may or may not work, but for us, what we felt was that isn't an approach. We wanted to first get into the cloud, ensure we understand the risks, ensure we understand the scale that cloud gives us, optimize what we have first before we start bringing in more, right? So it's really right-sizing your cloud infrastructure. Sometimes it's easy to just spin up more demand or spin up more service, and then when you see a bill, you realize, why am I using so much capacity? A lot of it is not even 10% utilized, right? It's really right-sizing your cluster, right-sizing your environment before you start thinking about migrating more stuff into the cloud. All right, so take the time to actually optimize and enrich what you already have. And then finally is really migrate what you think you want into the cloud. All right, so let's talk about data and how we've approached ensuring our data is well protected. And quite honestly, it has to be a multi-layered, ring-fenced approach. Not one solution is going to provide all the answers. For us, it was encryption at rest. So any data that got into the cloud was actually encrypted, no matter what sensitive levels. Anything that got into the cloud was encrypted. Second, we had a ring fence around sensitive and private information, right? So we got obviously tag data that was sensitive and private. And I'll talk to you about the data governance framework as well, but really ensuring that all your sensitive information is actually encrypted or anonymized, over and above the storage level encryption that you probably have on data, right? Third is really controlling the network access, right? Don't ever expose your data to the public, because it's very easy to do in a public cloud setting, right? If you don't configure it right, anybody in the world is able to access your data. So control that access, and in our case, it was physical networks as well with our virtual private endpoints. Right? It was ensuring that the data is ring-fenced. There's nobody able to come from the public domain. The only way you can get access is through our internal networks, through a virtual private cloud interface. All right, and finally, it's your RBACs. It's your role-based access control, the fine-grained controls that you want against your data, and ensuring that's in place on day one. All right, we talked about sensitive data and PII, personally identifiable information. Start enforcing your data governance from day one. Don't wait for you to push data into the cloud before you get your data governance framework. And at a minimum, sorry, was there a question? Yes.
So you talked about data at rest.
Data at rest.
Or also data in motion.
Right, so in this case, it was data at rest. Once you land it on the disks, it's encrypted. But you'll see later on that our data in transit or in motion is also encrypted using TSL and SSL and so on. But that's absolutely a fantastic point because you don't want to send data over the public internet without really encrypting that. All right, so at a minimum, right, from a data governance perspective, obviously you can have layers and layers of data governance. But what worked for us was identifying at least 3 key stakeholders, at least 3. We have a lot more, but for the simplicity's sake, I've used 3 key stakeholders. One is your data suppliers, right? These are guys that not just give you data, but understand the data itself. What do those fields mean to the business, right? What is important, what is not? Second are the data stewards. These are folks that once interacted with the data suppliers can actually help with the classification of data itself. Is this sensitive enough for the company? Is it personally identifiable information, right? And finally, you need a data custodian that's going to implement all your rules that the data governance comes up with. If they tag data a certain way, then the custodian needs to execute all of those protection rules. And this has to be in place on day one before you even launch any data into the cloud. All right. We enforce metadata and data catalogs. Sometimes it gets missed. And from our perspective, it was ensuring that we know what we're putting in the cloud. The last thing we wanted was somebody telling us that, hey, you've put the sensitive information, it's not tagged, it's not classified, it's not protected, right? So any data that went into the cloud, we captured metadata on, including business descriptions, technical descriptions, the data's sensitive levels, and the controls associated with that, right? And once you capture all of that, and quite honestly, that was quite a painful experience, right? Working with data suppliers and saying, guys, before we move anything to the cloud, help us understand, right, what it actually means. And there was a ton of resistance because nobody wants to take the time to actually articulate exactly what the data points are. And I would say make them feel the pain at least the first time around, right? So you know exactly what's in the cloud, right? And once you capture that information, make it available. Make it available to everybody. Provide that easy access, whether it is a simple Excel or a simple web page that sits on a database. Ours actually sits on a NoSQL store where we have a web page that goes and just extracts the data that you're searching for. But provide that easy access, right? Capture data lineage. Right? This goes back to, I guess, the 4 V's of big data, right? Velocity, variety, and veracity, right? The data lineage talks about the veracity. Do people trust the data that you have? And the way they trust the data is if you tell them exactly what you've done with the data, how you've brought it in, what are the transformations that was applied to the data, and what the end result is. And it goes back to your KPIs as well. Right? If people question your KPIs, it is so much more easier just to go back to data lineage and then figure out how we ended up with that KPI versus having to go back and dig through your code. All right? And the fourth one I added there because that I felt was very important to do, right? Not just metadata, but provide data profilings as well, and maybe any kind of descriptive statistics that you have on the data, list of values, histograms, distinct counts, number of blanks, nulls, things like that, because that a good analyst will do anyway, right? When you feed data to a good analyst, the first thing they're going to do is check how good the data is, right? What is the number of blanks I have in my data set? What's the number of nulls? If 50% are blanks and nulls, can I even use this data, right? So without them asking for it, capture all of that up front, have that visible as part of your catalog. So when a data analyst comes in, he's armed with everything he needs to do. He's got the lineage, he's got the metadata, he understands the sensitivity of the data as well. He's ready for analysis. Yes? So for our initial release, what we call the MVP, this is all hand-coded. It was Excel sheets with Spark jobs and all of it. We are exploring products that will do that for us. The intent is what we've captured will just migrate into that new product. But for us to be able to stand up the MVP, we realized we've got to at least capture all of this without even having the tool. So it was actually hand-coded.
May I ask how much effort have you spent on it?
So overall, I would say the data transformation is your big kahuna, right? Data transformation is where you spend most of your time. But the metadata, we probably spend 20 to 25%. right? Which includes data governance as well. So it's really working with data governance, ensuring we classify the data appropriately, and then capturing metadata on all our fields. All right. Well, so our MVP was stood up in 6 months. Again, this is minimum viable product for our Bluestream digital broker, right? But obviously, it's a much longer project because we're now in 1.2 of that release. All right, the actual data migration now, just talking about data itself. Well, we employed lift and shift, and Anand here is going to talk in detail about some of those techniques, lifting and shifting from existing data stores. But that is a popular thing, just get your data from your on-prem systems, move it in, lift and shift, right? And what we also did was, while we were lifting and shifting, where we could, and we couldn't do it everywhere, but where we could, we leveraged the hierarchical structures, right? And what I mean by that is if you have a truly normalized star schema, don't just move it into big data or flat files, right? Flatten it out as much as you can. And we actually like the hierarchical structure because it's one pass through the data, you get every single thing about that particular entity, right? So if possible, employ hierarchical structures. It's much more faster in processing from a big data perspective. Obviously, it doesn't compare to your star schema in the relational world, but just migrating a star schema into big data world isn't going to give you the performance that you need. You're better off converting that into hierarchical. All right, data encryption in motion and at rest. We talked about that. Obviously, the disk and bucket level encryption versus the encryption on the pipes itself when you transfer the data. Automated control. So this was something we emphasized early on, which is once the data is tagged as sensitive or PII, personally identifiable information, the controls for it was automated. So all you have to do, all the data steward had to do was tag it, and then the jobs automatically read the tags and ensured that the appropriate level of encryption or anonymization was applied. So it wasn't an afterthought, it was baked right into the product. And that's, in my mind, the only way to ensure nothing slips through the crack. As long as your metadata and the classification of data is valid, then your controls will ensure that when data lands in the cloud, you have that extra layer of security baked into it. Right? Lastly is the data layers. It's really figuring out or clearly defining and creating boundaries around that as well, such as your landing zones. Right? For us, the landing zone is where we bring in all data, including sensitive information in its raw format. It's not anonymized yet, right? So that is highly protected. So nobody really has access to it apart from our service accounts and jobs, right? Once data moves out of the landing zones, that's where we apply all the protections. It has a lot more, access isn't as restricted. Obviously, it is still controlled, but not as restricted as the landing zones. The last thing you want is people hitting your landing zone. You don't want any users, whether it's analytical users or anything else, hitting your landing zone. It's got to be just your data pipeline or your data factory, as we call it, just those jobs hitting your landing zone, right? You have a sandbox data which allows analytics folks to actually go in, bring their own data at times. Again, this is in their own buckets, in their own area, but they can actually merge that with existing data sets that have actually indeed been curated. And then you have the curated zone, which is conducive more for visualization, right? These are aggregated data sets, cleansed to the nth degree, and folks that consume curated data sets, all they're looking really for is a visual or a set of visuals or dashboards that they can interact with. They're not really looking at any kind of deeper analysis or any kind of machine learning on it. It's really for visualization, building graphs, and potentially showcasing those graphs with our clients, right? We had to re-platform our applications. And we had the advantage that since Bluestream was a new product, we could actually build it from the scratch. So, but the other ones, the legacy product had to be re-platformed. We had to change the connections and all of that stuff.
What technology did you use for the data migration, considering you're moving probably petabytes?
We don't have the petabyte scale. We do have terabytes, right? We don't have the petabyte scale, at least not yet. And Anand will cover some of those aspects as well. There are a bunch of tools that we used. Some of it was just direct migration. Others had to be extracted from databases, right? Stored in legacy data warehouses and so on. And we had to move from there. Yep. It's less than 1 petabyte, yes, yes. And it's again, the blue stream data, right? We haven't gone back to the legacy. That's the migration step that we talked about earlier. All right, quick recap. So what did I talk about? We talked about our journey into the cloud. We talked about reasons why we went into the cloud, and we also discussed how. Here's a quick recap of how. It's building your business case, right? Ensuring everybody's aware that this is what you're trying to do. And quite honestly, it is a concerted effort with multiple departments, multiple stakeholders, and everybody has to be marching the same way, right? It includes infrastructure, it includes IT, it includes the business, it includes data privacy and governance, it includes risk assessment, it includes info security. It's like pretty much 4 or 5 different groups have to march in unison. And that's where the alignment comes into play. Just make that business case and get the alignment. Second is your data migration. What do you want to do? Is it lift and shift? Is it hierarchical? Is it anything else that you guys want to do? Third is lead with security. Ensure you have that security in place before you start migrating data. Create and enforce data governance that goes with security as well. So create your framework, create your data governance framework. Ensure your data is truly ring-fenced and has a multi-layered protection. And lastly, capture metadata from day one, even if it is in Excel spreadsheets, even if it is in Word documents. You can always fine-tune it and make it better. But if you don't capture it, quite honestly, it is going to take you a lot more time and effort to actually capture the metadata as you go along.
Did you guys have any lessons learned in terms of cost effectiveness and ROI of choosing cloud versus on-prem?
Interestingly, we actually are going through a right-sizing exercise right now. Because what ended up happening is when we started migrating or when we started building the platform, when we, I guess, projected out the cost, it was actually going to cost us a lot more than what we thought it would, right? Cost sometimes is one of the biggest factors. In my mind, I would say in the long run, you kind of even out between on-prem and cloud, even though I guess the minute you get onto public cloud, it's cheaper. The minute you stay on public cloud and don't optimize, it gets expensive really quick. And we found it out the hard way because what ends up happening is you just turn servers on and you just leave it on, you just don't bother, right? And then when you go back and start looking at your billing statement, that's when you realize, oh, I'm running all these servers, I'm not even using them. So that's why I said in one of my previous slides, right? Once you put your applications in the cloud, just pause and enrich and optimize what you already have. Right sizing, in my mind, is the biggest thing. We probably saved about 50% of our cost so far in the last couple of months compared to the month we actually launched. Right? If I compare that month to this month, even though we have more data and more processing, we're running at 50% lower capacity. Right? So it's really right sizing your environment before you start, launching more products and more solutions. All right. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Anand again.
Thanks, Dantu. So a lot of questions about application migration, data migration, and data workloads migration. I thought I'll touch upon a few slides here for you to see show you about what Impetus is doing in that space. And as I referred earlier, one of the most important things that we've seen in the enterprise is transform the legacy data infrastructure. And this is one of the most important things that we realize is, while you do that, the most important is not break your current operations. And one of the most important things that enterprises want is reliability as you move from one environment to the other. These are systems that have been running in your enterprise for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years with reliable processes. And as you move to a newer technology, newer paradigm, the operations have to run seamlessly. Needless to say, CIOs have a choice. have always a choice to make, whether migrate assets or total reengineering. And that's a conundrum that people get into. As Dantu said, they had to get something on the cloud, so they started reengineering, or they started redoing everything from the ground up, and they built some applications. But there are a host of legacy applications that still need to be migrated. So you could do total reengineering. You can have an army of programmers build it, or migrate assets, where agility is more important. As I said, if you remember, the transformation of data infrastructure has to happen overnight, because enterprises cannot wait for another 2 years, 3 years, 4 years to do all this migration manually. So our belief is the manual migration is long and error prone, because everything, all these complex business logic that has been written by army of programmers over the past so many years, if they have to be rewritten, if they have to be revalidated, if they have to be certified by business and by security organizations inside a large enterprise, it takes its own time, effort, and money. So what we have done as Impetus, a part of the tool that we're working with Marsh also on, is ability to move your ETL and analytical workloads to Spark. And that could run either on cloud or on-premise. Now, Teradata and Netezza are just examples. We've done Teradata, Netezza, Oracle, SQL Server, or your ETL tools like Informatica or Ab Initio. But the more important thing is we've given you an instant way to move your ETL and analytical loads into the new world. I'll share 3 quick stories with you of the work that we've done with some customers, so you get a perspective of how this has benefited them. One of the largest retail chains, 80% of course, this was Teradata to Hadoop, 80% of their BT scripts automatically migrated through the tool. The biggest advantage that we heard from these guys is the analytics that they could do in a traditional Teradata environment was always restricted, was always limited. And what this has done, moving to a big data world, has opened up the opportunities of analytics on this data. And more importantly, what gave them the ability was ability to allow business to do ad hoc reports on the big data world instead of Teradata. So huge enabler for this retailer. One of the largest telcos in the country. So again, a Teradata to Hadoop, interestingly. So we not only migrated their BTX and MLOads and TPTs. As we started on this project, one of the very interesting things that we realized that there was a lot of mainframe data which was populating Teradata. And if we had not automated the mainframe, the Teradata to Hadoop migration would have been worthless. So in the process, we have automated, or we've actually migrate out of their mainframe processes and get all of that logic back into Spark, and now runs on the Hadoop environment. The initial estimates that were given by their own internal IT teams or by other vendors who were going to do this manually was about 2.5 to 3 years. And this is a fraction of their Teradata. 20% of their Teradata processing went 2.5 to 3 years. We finished it in about 7.5 months. Lastly, I said I'll stick to 3. I won't go beyond that. This is one of the largest mortgage security company, a company that owns mine and your mortgages for over so many years, had 40 Netezza instances. While they had their own internal Hadoop system, they said, we're not going to be migrating this to Hadoop, and we're going to go straight into AWS. So we've migrated 40 Netezza instances to AWS, taken all their SQL code into Spark SQL, and they had very interesting stuff because they have Oracle and they had Netezza, and there was a lot of CDC work, change data, that was going on between the two. We've taken all of that and moved everything into Spark that today runs on S3. A schema-to-schema migration of their data, and all their, not just the ETL logic, but also the CDC logic now moved to Spark running on S3.
Is the automated distillation of this procedure 100% automated?
Yes. So there. So I'll come back to that question and answer it in a slightly different way for you. But yes, there is a certain percentage which is 100%. So, timely question and how we do this. For us, it's a 4-step process: assess, transform, validate, and execute. And all of these are done through the software. There's no armies of programmers that you need. The software comes in, assesses your Netezza warehouse or your Teradata warehouse or Oracle SQL Server, whatever. It will tell you how many SQLs are running, what kind of CPUs are they using, how much memory are they using, what kind of tables, what are offloadable, non-offloadable. So the assess tool will give you a summary of all of that. It will give you, as of today, a snapshot of how your existing legacy data warehouse is running. It will also tell you in the transform process that some of these logic can be moved to Spark, some of these can be done with Hive, or you could also move it to a Spark Scala, if Scala makes sense, or a Spark or a PySpark. And based on that, you could decide, okay, these are my queries that I have to migrate, and you could migrate into the choice of technology that's recommended. As I said, reliability is one of the most important aspects in an enterprise business. Again, going from a legacy environment that's running 24/7, that's been running for so many years, providing valid data. As you move to the new system, validation becomes very important. And it's expensive to do in a manual way. And the tool has automated this, whereby you can validate every data schema that's going from one place to the other, every query that's going from one place to the other, distinct counts, mix, min, max, everything can be validated through the tool. And finally, execute. Execute, you could have any way of execution in your existing environment. You could be doing Control M, you could be doing something else, and the tool will support any of those, and all these queries can run in that model. So the question that you asked, whether these are 100% migratable, the assess tool will tell you which queries can be migrated 100% and which queries cannot be migrated. And you have a drill down feature to say, why is this query not migratable? Now, there could be two reasons for that. One is that the query is very complex and it may not support it may not support an auto migration. Or there are some functions that have been used in the Teradata world, Netezza world, that the grammar engine doesn't support today, right? And that's why this slide becomes important, because what we have done is a complete translation engine which is all grammar driven. So the more number of queries that go through the system, the grammar engine becomes intelligent always. So the first time I may come back and say, this will do 80% migration. In the next round, in the next application, it may do 85% or 90% or more. So the grammar engine keeps becoming intelligent. So if you look at this, it's very simple for us. It's a technology in, technology out. You could have any technology, SQL, PL SQL, stored procedures, ab initio, complex graphs, and you could spit that out into a Spark SQL, HiveQL, or PySpark, or whatever. One of our customers, one of the largest financial banks, actually, they had about 20,000 reports, Oracle reports. These were written ages ago. And they said, we don't even know what is the logic behind these Oracle reports. And the same tool that would do a Teradata or a Netezza migration took Oracle reports and moved them into Tableau. So this is going to be my last slide. What is the benefit of doing all this? What is the benefit of moving to the cloud, moving to the new world? And what is important for an enterprise? From our perspective, what we, as we talk to so many large enterprises, this is the most important thing for an enterprise, single source of truth. And everybody, whether it be customer, whether it be supply chain, whether it be marketing data, finance data, single source of truth. And this is so hard to get today in the enterprise world. Why? Because a new world demands new approaches. And that new approach could involve a new data infrastructure. Data availability, I was reviewing Dantu's slides, and I like the term delivering insurance your way, not my way. And that's the term that the enterprises, the large enterprises have to change. It's no longer my way of doing business, it's the way that the community, so delivering insurance your way. And what's important there for a business is have data availability instantly. And I think one of you said scalability is an important thing. And how do you leverage that? Today, it's very hard to scale any of your legacy environments. And cloud gives us a perfect flat platform to leverage our data infrastructure. So leveraging cloud is, again, going to be very, very important for enterprises. Thank you. Any other questions? Sure. Oh, absolutely. So as a matter of fact, sure. Very good question. So as a part of the SS tool, the SS tool will also tell us in our tool what is the SLAs that these have. Now, some of these queries might be running 10 times a week. Some of these queries might be running 100 times a day. Some of these queries might be running once in 6 months, but they are very, very critical. So there are SLAs defined, and those are some things that we also get from business users. These are very, very important reports for us or processes for us. For example, at the telecom company that we talked about, one of the important SLA there was that all the migration work or the ETL work for all the data that they get on a daily basis has to finish by 7 a.m. in the morning, so that Tableau can do whatever it has to do on that data, and the report has to be available to the C-level execs and the senior VP level execs in that telecom company by 9 a.m. 9 a.m. EST every day. So that created an SLA challenge for us, and what processes have to be moved to what. So those are all taken care of in that, so that when we do the assessment, some of it is, of course, will be manual and understanding what the SLAs are, and that will help us figure out what technology to be moved it into. Sure.
Since you're going to move to the public cloud, how do you select which vendor? Well, I'm curious, I'm really curious about how your selection process is, and how do you do that? I mean, I'm not trying to put
No, I think you can answer that question.
Yeah. So from our perspective, it was very clear. We're going to go with the one that has the largest market share and the one that has the most number of services. We actually evaluated all of them, right? And then and you guys know what I'm talking about, right? So there was one that actually had pretty much all the services we need. Now, does it mean we'll stop using others? No. There are certain very specific applications that still need other cloud providers. But I would say majority of our cloud infrastructure is with that one single player. Between the cloud providers? Not really. Because if you go just based on TCO versus the speed and the agility, then you would go with different providers, right? For us, what was important was we've got to have pretty much all the services we need up and running, hopefully in a serverless mode, right? And I don't think we touched upon the serverless piece, but so even though we're in public cloud, we actually run our own instances, right? We run our own instances within EC2s and within our VPC, But the goal is to really go serverless. So you don't even have to manage that infrastructure. Today, anything that runs within your VPC is within, I mean, you have to patch it and maintain it and so on, right? If it is serverless, you only truly pay it as a service. And that was one of the driving forces in my mind, right, for us to be able to go to one provider and say, you know what, this provider has the most number of serverless services. And it's very attractive for us because we don't have infrastructure to maintain. B, it's scalable, almost infinitely scalable. And C, you only pay for what you use. Right? With some of our existing infrastructure, even with our Bluestream platform, there are machines to be maintained, even though it's on a VPC, and you're paying for those uptime. Whether you use it or not, you're paying for that uptime, right? And our intent really is serverless, which I feel, at least from my personal experience, that truly is where the cloud is heading, where there's absolutely no infrastructure to maintain, even within your VPC. It's all managed by your cloud provider. No, the public cloud. So there are services within the public cloud which are truly serverless, right? And they all have an endpoint that can be protected. And we're only looking at services where we can actually secure the endpoint. There are other services that you cannot really secure the endpoint because it's a public endpoint. But from our perspective, keeping security in mind is really just serverless with an endpoint that we can actually secure.
Yeah. And from an Impetus perspective on the consulting side, I think there are a couple things that we take into account, whether it's an infrastructure as a service or a platform as a service that the company wants to adopt, and what services are available, as Danto said, as a ready-made service available. What will it take to implement elasticity? What will it take to implement security? So some of those considerations come in beyond the business considerations of an organization while we decide on how much of the real-time job has to be done, what is the analytical capability that has to be on the cloud. So as you asked the question around the TCO, some of these factors become a part of the TCO conversation also. What all do you want to do it on the cloud, and how do you want to do it on the cloud?
One question for you. Do you truly believe that all the legacy applications can be eventually migrated to public cloud?
Some of it is a philosophical answer too. Some of it is, I think, at some point, yes. Can be migrated to the cloud. I think from my perspective, I think cloud is not 100% structured today to handle all of that today. And as governance and security are prime considerations. And that's the same thing that we see at our existing customers too. Not every app is targeted for the cloud. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, not every app is even sometimes targeted for big data also. So there will be some application that may remain in the legacy infrastructure.
Yep.
Okay. No other questions? Thank you very much. If you want to take a look at the product, we'll be there at the show floor. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.